Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulty there. But it's not a given that students are going to cheat more in remote instruction. Lots of research has shown that students seem just as likely to cheat in both. And this makes sense given that most forms of cheating are equally viable for remote and in-person classes. For example, assignment or homework cheating, plagiarism, contract cheating, giving false excuses, all of those can happen in a face-to-face, traditional, in-person instruction as they can in remote instruction. Perhaps the only difference really is in exams, whereas if students come from a school where they're used to being proctored in person for their exams, all of a sudden being in a remote environment where nobody's watching them, they may experience, more temptations and opportunities than normal. And that's where the truth lies, right? The truth lies in whether it's remote or in-person instruction, that students are more likely to cheat when there are opportunities to do so, when they are in a heightened state of arousal and under stress and pressure, like we all are right now, when the class rewards performance, not mastery, and when the class reinforces extrinsic, not intrinsic goals, when instruction is perceived to be poor, and when it's less likely that there will be costs to cheating. So regardless of in-person or remote instruction, students are more likely to cheat in these circumstances. So what do we do? Well, what I want to talk to you today about is 3 things: informing and educating, protecting and preventing, and practicing and supporting. So 1, how do we inform and educate? First, we must make information about academic integrity useful and easy to find. We have students affirm academic integrity, we assess their understanding of it, and we engage them in discussion or reflection throughout the term of your instruction in academic integrity. I'm going to talk about each of these a bit more. So, easy to find. Whatever site you're using for your remote construction, you want to display academic integrity as a clear link for more information. It could look a variety of ways. It could be as simple as this. So this is in Blackboard, where academic integrity is the very first thing they see in their navigation system for their classroom. It's always there. Every time they go to click on something, they're going to see academic integrity. It's a nice little timely reminder. The information has to be useful. So although you should obviously link to your institution's academic integrity policy, that's insufficient. You want to be clear with students what cheating and plagiarism is in this particular context. This is so important all the time, but especially in remote. So for example, if you're going to say this exam is open book and open notes, do you really mean that? Does that mean students can go onto an online site, ask the questions that you're asking them and have somebody else answer them and then copy those answers, right? So we have to be very clear, especially when it's a new environment for people, when people are unsure. We have to be especially clear what those definitions are. The importance of integrity, not just to the class, but to the discipline, to their lives. Relate it back to the students' lives so that they know that this isn't just a silly thing they have to worry about right now, but it is connected. Make sure they understand citation techniques. And this includes when they're working with other people. I call this honest collaboration. When they're working with other people, to have them acknowledge the sources of that help. It's not just about the journal articles and the websites, but each other. So telling them how to do that is teaching them a good life skill. And this is perhaps one of the most important. Let them know what are legitimate sources of assistance that they can access remote or online. Our students have access to 24/7 sites that say that they're going to help the students, but may not be helping them learn, but rather just helping them complete assessments. So we need to be clear with students what sites they can go to and what sites they should not. Also, in informing on academic integrity, we can enhance moral self-regulation through doing certain things. Creating a class code of ethics or statement of values with your students. right? Getting them to say what they want to have a fair, honest, trustworthy, respectful, and responsible classroom. When they get to feed into it, there is more buy-in than if you're just telling them the rules. You're creating a culture that way rather than saying, as the instructor, I say this and you must do this. Bring your students into the conversation, co-create that together. If you have students working in groups or teams, have them create a code of ethics themselves, so that they will be able to talk to each other about what they expect from each other in working in the group. Have them do integrity affirmations on each assessment. And perhaps most important, whether in large in-person classes or in remote instruction, as the professor, form a personal moral connection with the students. Do a video introducing yourself. Talk about yourself a bit personally as you're comfortable doing. For example, I'm a home brewer. I tell students that I brew beer, and all of a sudden I'm well liked, right? So find something that you can connect with students about, and that is very helpful for them to restrain themselves when we feel like we might be cheating on somebody rather than cheating against this faceless host, faceless instructor. So here's an example of what I have done in my class. It's got our values along the left-hand side. And then it says what the students will do to uphold that value and what we as the instructional staff will do, right? It's not just about what the students have to do. It's about what we're going to do to uphold these values as well. And that is very important, that we put ourselves in the equation with our students, in the community with our students. Okay, on to educating. So informing and educating. Start your course off with an academic integrity assessment, a mastery quiz. In other words, you're not grading it for performance. You're helping students master the material. Include what the definition and importance of academic integrity is. Maybe refer to your policies, procedures, and consequences on your campus. Give them common cheating scenarios that you've experienced in your class, even in the face-to-face version, for students to think about and evaluate and assess of whether they think they're cheating and why or why not. And then reinforce this objective throughout the course, this learning objective throughout the course. Requiring honest collaboration, like I said, as they work on all sorts of assignments. And also get them to self-reflect on their processes. So when students are more aware of their learning and how they're learning, they are less likely to cheat. And so helping students self-reflect on how they completed an assignment and share that with you can be helpful for reducing cheating. Next, on to prevent and protect. For prevention, we know from the literature that if you can reduce the motivation for cheating by doing some certain things. So on narrative assignments, for example, provide the students with some choice of control. Don't give everybody the same paper prompt. Maybe you have 20 paper prompts and they can choose, or maybe you're just giving them some guidance and they can choose their own, you're giving them the learning objectives and they can choose their own topic. This, of course, depends on whether you're dealing with freshmen or seniors. Providing more choice of control to seniors or graduate students is fine. You don't want to provide so much to freshmen that it's overwhelming. And think about how much choice of control will be too overwhelming in this new environment, this remote instruction environment too. But some choice of control can be helpful. Make sure you make the assessments meaningful and authentic. This is also really important. So I always use this example, but instead of, I teach ethics and organizational ethical decision making. So instead of giving students an organizational code of ethics and having them analyze it, I say, hey, go find a code of ethics for an employer or for a type of industry that you want to work for and analyze that one. Again, doesn't mean they can't cheat on it, but maybe they'll be less likely. And of course, have students cite all their sources. Again, not just the journal articles, not just the the papers that you assigned, but their friends, their parents, whoever helped them with their work. On homework and problem sets, you might want to consider focusing on mastery when it comes to homework and problem sets, rather than on using those for summative evaluations. Again, allow open notes and have students cite their sources, but clarify what open notes means. It doesn't mean that you can get someone else to answer your questions for you. Avoid textbook provided questions. The instructor solutions are out there. If you must use those, use a large pool, individualize and alter them. So not every student is getting the same questions, or alter them so they're not exactly the same as the textbook. And as I mentioned, make mastery and not performance oriented. If you are using things that are easy to cheat on as ways to measure students' performance, that you are not measuring performance as much as you are probably measuring their ability to copy and paste, right? And so thinking about what kind of assignments can I design when students have the option and temptations for cheating. For prevention on exams, consider again formative quizzes as a warm-up to the summative one. So several low stakes or no stakes formative quizzes throughout the term to get students used to how you ask questions, what it's like to take the quiz in a remote instructional environment. Just it's practice, right? Our students are used to practicing for tests, so allow them to practice throughout the term. You can consider online proctoring services, or, we're experimenting with this week, proctoring our own exams using Zoom. Consider making your exams open notes, which means you might have to rewrite your exams. You might have to change the types of questions that you're asking. Because if you're just going to do a multiple choice exam, it's going to be, could be pretty easy to cheat on. So think about the types of exams and making them open book, open notes. Horizontal grading should have been on protecting slide. This is when you have one person always grade question 1, the next person always grade question 2, so on and so forth, because that allows you to detect if cheating did occur on the test. And then if you can, use your LMS exam quiz features. So in most LMS systems, you can limit the exam time to specific dates and times. You can limit access to internet. You can have students ask one question at a time, not see completed questions and answers in the event that they might share those with other people. And then change the test characteristics. So randomize them, scramble question sequence and answer choices, so every student's getting a different test. Modify your exam questions every term, not reusing the same questions. And sometimes you can do that very easily with just changing the numbers if it's a math-based discipline, and sometimes it's a little bit harder to do. So I acknowledge that not everything I'm telling you works in every discipline or for every class, but these are just some ideas from which you can pick and choose. Okay, so for protecting, we do want to check for assessment integrity before evaluation. So maybe you use a similarity detection tool if you haven't in the past. One thing I want to caveat there is check all papers. Don't use similarity detection tools, percentage similarity, or their assessment of what papers you should check and which papers you shouldn't. You should be checking all papers for integrity before you grade them, because you can't grade if you can't be assured of their fair and honest completion. You should read papers for contract cheating. There's a lot of skills in here, a lot of different things you can do. We could do a whole webinar just on contract cheating, but you really do need to be reading papers for to make sure it was the student who wrote the paper, right? So some things you can look for are the references related to the class? Does the student, is the writing at a level that doesn't match the student or doesn't match what you normally see in that class? Are there strange words used? Spelling for the wrong country? Materials that you never talked about in class, content that you never taught. These can all be signs of contract cheating, and you'll need to work with your academic integrity officers on your campus to sometimes to figure that out. You can Google your question prompts, whether they're your exams or your homeworks, to monitor for contract cheating. There are sites that, again, will allow students to upload questions and their tutors will answer them, and then students will submit those answers as their own work. So you can at least monitor for that, find those questions, and then be able to look for the evidence of those answers being used when you're grading exams. Now, it would be great if you can conduct oral, in-person, i.e. video, exams with some or all students. If you have a large class and you have lots of TAs, maybe you each take one person and you do that for at least one of the exams. Oral in-person exams are a great way to reduce the likelihood of cheating. So if you have a smaller class, you might just want to switch to that method for remote instruction. And finally, practice and support. This is our last one. You, as the instructor, are the person who needs to support academic integrity in your class environment, whether in person or remote. So you want to model integrity by citing your sources in your lecture, right? Don't forget to put your sources on the lecture slides. You want to attend to assessment design all the time, but even more so in this remote environment. You want to show up on time. You want to show up prepared. You want to be available. Virtual office hours are great, but I would plan in actual intentional check-ins with each student per term. Again, you may not be able to do all of them yourself, but if you have TAs, one 20-minute virtual conference per student can help them stay connected to you, help them stay connected to the course, and especially for the students who are struggling. If you can only do it for some students, then do it with the students who are struggling. And then follow your institutional procedures for reporting violations. The language I give my faculty is, it's my professional and ethical obligation to follow the protocol for responding to cheating. It's so important that we don't give a signal to students that it's okay for them to cheat just because of the situation that we're in. So those are three features we want to do. We need to inform and educate, we need to prevent and protect, and we need to practice and support. And I just want to end with this. It's at this critical time when we feel threatened by them at the most basic levels, again, food, shelter, safety, that we maintain our integrity. For without integrity, we may survive, but we will not thrive. What's going to happen next? We're going to answer some questions, but I mean, after today, we are going to collate those questions and answer them and make them available publicly. We've created a Google group called Remote Teaching at academicintegrity.org. You can subscribe by email, or you can go to groups.google.com and search for remote teaching and join on the web. And you can choose to receive emails from that Google group, or you can always just go to the Google group platform and see the conversations there. And we want to crowdsource ideas. We want to give you an opportunity to speak with other people who are interested in integrity and share ideas and act as a sounding board for each other. And as I mentioned, we're going to have a couple more webinars soon. One on preventing and protecting, so the tactics and techniques for teaching remotely with integrity, and practicing and supporting. How do you do academic misconduct case management remotely? We'll have both of those and maybe some more. So again, I just want to thank both my institution and ICI for supporting this. And I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and Doug to field questions, and the three of us will answer them. But I also have some polls I would like you to answer if you would. So our first poll is, would you attend a live Q&A on Zoom like this, where we have a panel of experts who will just answer questions? So not any webinar ahead of time or any talk ahead of time, but just a question and answer. So if you can click on polls and answer in the poll, that would be great. I see people answering yes in chat. We'll count those as well. Maybe nobody, it says you can see the poll. Maybe I'll end because everybody's just putting it in the chat. Yeah, can't see the poll. Interesting. Okay. I wonder if it's because I'm sharing my screen. I'm going to stop sharing. Can you see it now? I've never tried polls before. Sorry, everybody. I thought I'd give it a shot. Okay, we'll just end it. Oh, there's one person who saw it. There should be polls at the bottom of your screen. Maybe that's what's missing.
So Tricia, I think
Yeah.
if participants can look at the mouse over the bottom of the Zoom screen, a bar will pop up and polling will be an option. And if you press polling, the poll should come up in that form.
Great, thank you. I'll leave it up for a bit because we do have another poll as well.
Seems like maybe that option isn't working, so yeah.
Okay. Well, our other question is, when is good timing for the other webinars we want to do? Do you want them right away? April, May, June, July? So that was the other thing that we are interested in. So you can let us know about that as well.
I just saw a poll pop up, Tricia. This is Doug.
Oh, well, I just closed it. Maybe it's because I had it up first when I was still sharing a screen. Can you see it now?
I do still see it.
Anyways, that's okay. We can move to questions.
Okay. This is Doug Harrison, working with Tricia and Amanda. Amanda is working with me on the other side of this, which is culling questions out of the chat. Please do continue to submit questions while we're talking if you have them, and we'll do our best to take a shot at them. The first question is about online testing, particularly objective tests like multiple choice. And the participant said that I've seen grades increase by at least 10 to 20% compared to in-class testing for the same student. It seems clear that they're using a browser to help answer questions. Even with time limits on questions, students can quickly find answers, even if you frame word questions. The Google search only provides part of the answer. What can we do? I'll take just a brief shot at it, but I think Tricia will have reinforcements here too. And first of all, it's to echo Tricia's main point, and I don't want this to sound glib or non-responsive, but wherever possible, where objective exam can be transitioned to more authentic assessments, that will get you first a less cheatable assignment, but more importantly, it'll get you a more authentic a way to understand if the student has really gained the mastery that they need. And there's another question that we'll talk about, sort of how do you do that in a second, because that was a related one. But that's really the first way to start for these things. If you have to write objective assessments, you should assume, I think, as Tricia suggested, that assessments are open. They're open book, open internet. And if you're using test bank questions, even though I know you've indicated in the question that you asked that varying that cannot always be completely cheat proof, it will reduce the likelihood. So if you can vary the stems of the test bank items and also use the length of time, while it's not possible to limit it so that no one can ever cheat, if you limit it to the time that a prepared student would be able to successfully demonstrate knowledge and competence, it will at least minimize the capacity for someone to try to Google everything that's there.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say on that as well is that if you do end up creating new assessments that try to move away from the objective, or if you modify objective exams and introduce new items that you haven't previously validated, we really have to be prepared to either curve or consider regrading some of those new items to account for the fact that they may not always work as well if you haven't had a chance to previously validate them.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
Another question. If actually, I'm going to go to the one that relates to how do you do that conversion of assessments, and the question is, how do we address? How do we actually move from one form of objective assessment to more authentic assessments? I just have one brief observation, and I'll convert it. Ask Tricia to talk too. But at the very basics in terms of assessment construct, you want to go back to your learning objectives, the knowledge and skills and abilities that the assessment is trying to validate, and then look at how you can, say, write a word problem that would address a cluster of those, or create a scenario-based question that asks them to develop a sort of narrative response that allows them to do the analysis, the synthesis, the summary, the skills that you want them to engage in. Tricia?
Yeah, no, I agree, Doug. And I think so lots of the things I said, some things are low-hanging fruit, a bit easier to do starting next week, right? And some things that you'll need a month or so to figure out. So be kind to yourself in terms of what you're going to choose and when you're going to choose to implement that. So if you're in the middle of instruction right now and you had to switch to remote, choose the lowest hanging fruit. Authentic assessments is not one of those, right? But if you're prepping, once you start prepping for fall, I think a lot of us might be on remote instruction still in the fall. Then, and even if you're not, it's better to have authentic assessments, right? So start prepping for the fall and doing what Doug suggested and looking at your learning objectives, looking at your current assessments and tweaking them to become more authentic and meaningful. And what that basically means is, are they relevant to students' lives today? Can students, again, have some, are they individualized? Does that mean they have some choice control over what they do? Use, of course, Bloom's taxonomy. The higher up the taxonomy you go with your questions, the less likely students are to cheat and the harder it is to cheat. So I just wanted to say that in terms of acknowledging how overwhelming this can be and scaffolding this for yourself, right? Not just for your students, but for yourself.
The next question is about some of the implications of online proctoring. If you're considering proctoring via Zoom or another similar tool, and an instructor notices potentially dishonest behavior, what are the pros and cons of recording? And if the recording is happening, do students have to agree in advance? I guess I think the question is about consent, and that such behavior may be reported. And would the recording be retained? What might be some of the FERPA issues there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think you need to speak with people at your own institution. There's state laws that are different around this. There's privacy concerns that have popped up at our university this week that aren't necessarily legal privacy concerns, but ethical privacy concerns. So you want to make sure you're in adherence to state law, federal law, obviously, your institutional policies and guidelines. But yes, if all of those allow recording, it is always good practice to inform the students ahead of time. You know, that's just fair to let them know that the session will be recorded and it will be retained. And from a FERPA perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but that's not an issue because you have an educational need for that information, and you know you're just trusted not to abuse that access to that recording.
That's correct. The next question I think is a really good one. How do we address students that may not have access to webcams or high-speed internet when proctoring? I will just say,
yeah, I'll throw that to you, Doug.
I don't think there's any good one solution that anybody can say about this. In fact, I spent part of my morning with my dean hat on, working with some faculty and program chairs who had a student who typically used the local, we're in a fully online institution, but this student typically used the local library for an internet access. And now that, you know, that kind of mobility is shut down, what do they do? I think you really want to look at what is your institutional infrastructure? Is there any way to help that student get the access that they need? It's not always the case that there will be, but if it is, certainly that's the first place to start. But then I think this is just where we all have to live with maximal flexibility and try to do the most equitable workaround solution you can find that doesn't disadvantage that student or give them any unfair advantage that other students aren't receiving. But you know, there's going to have to be some other way that you construct that assessment. And you know, it's possible, but it's time intensive, and you want to tap the resources of your institution to help you first try to solve the problem as effectively as possible. But if you can't, then find the best workaround that will not disadvantage anyone and support the student's success.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know our student affairs here have started a laptop lending program for students who do not have access to a laptop with a video or a laptop at all. So definitely tap into your resources on your campus.
The next question is also a little along the lines of academic misconduct case management, and will probably be good for the upcoming webinar. But we'll kick it around here a bit. Has anyone updated procedures to handle academic integrity issues online? Our college traditionally has student self-governance and an honor board that consists of faculty and students. So I think here the question is really asking about how do you kind of transition a very face-to-face and interpersonally rich process when you virtualize it.
Yeah, well, it depends on how your policy is written. Our policy didn't need to be updated because it didn't say must meet face-to-face, right? It didn't say must meet in person. It just said meet or hearing or what have you. And so we just moved to doing it all by Zoom without needing any policy change. What's interesting so you'll want to double check, right? And so the Honor Council can be on Zoom, and they can still be talking to the student and the instructor as needed, or your hearing board, or what have you. What we are thinking about is, to Doug's point, how we can still make that personal and connected, right? These are difficult conversations sometimes, and we're curious to see if whether the outcomes of these meetings change based on moving to the virtual environment. And we haven't noticed that yet, but it wouldn't surprise me because there's that not quite a feeling of connection, right? How do you manage emotions? You know, normally if we're meeting with a student in person and they start to cry, we pass them a tissue box, right? And we're able to express human connection that way. How do we do that virtually? I'm looking forward to doing that webinar with James Orr. I think is going to do that for us to hear some ideas, but that's some good crowdsourcing I think we need to do as well.
Right. The next question is about scale and capacity. What are some ideas on how to efficiently grade authentic assessments in large classes of over 100 students and few markers or graders to support?
Yeah. Well, I know that some professors effectively use some peer grading, some peer review. Of course, that takes some education with the students on how they do that, and they wouldn't give the final, grade, of course. But I know that that's a very successful strategy. I've also found actually using technology. So when I started grading online through Turnitin's Feedback Studio as an example. I'm not promoting Turnitin necessarily, but that's just what I've used. It cut my grading time down in half, even with authentic assessments, because there's these things called quick marks, and your LMS system might have them as well, where you can, you're often giving the same kind of feedback to students, and so I would have these quick marks that would I could just drag and drop right into the electronic assessment. I also kept a Google Doc going where if I came up with a good way of saying this idea is interesting, but you didn't flesh it out as much as you could have, blah, 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 then I did that great wording once. I'm not handwriting that on every assignment. I've got it in a Google Doc. I copy and paste. I tweak it for that particular student. It cut my grading time down in half. So those are two ideas I have. I don't know, Doug, if you have other ones.
No, I think those are right, and there's always the challenge here in trying to balance how richly you can assess the outcomes and competencies that you're working toward, and how to most authentically do that. And I know there's some chatter in the thread about sort of the nebulous nature of authentic assessment, and I think that's right to know that it means a lot of things to a lot of people, but it also means different things in different disciplinary contexts. And so a project-based approach can work in a lot of contexts, but it's easier to work in some more technical and professional disciplines than it might be in others. And so I think this is where understanding that the point that Tricia made at the top of the presentation, that this is not going to be perfect. And, you know, you've got to cut yourself and your students some slack in these situations as we learn how to most effectively integrate it. And it's also going to be, you know, going back to our institutions and surfacing what you can do and what the limitations are, so that there is awareness of what level of support can be provided or not, because there's a limit to it.
Yeah, and one other thing, I just thought of this, Doug, when you were talking, was rubrics, right? And I know that sounds obvious, but I know there's still a lot of faculty who don't use rubrics, and using a rubric can really speed up your grading process as well, because you're not pulling things out of thin air, and it connects students back to the learning objectives of the assignment of the course. And one thing I didn't mention that's always good to do for integrity and for learning, in particular in mastery, is making sure students understand the learning objectives, how each assessment ties back to those learning objectives, and how you're going to assess whether what they've submitted demonstrate those learning objectives. And so rubrics are critical as well. And again, in your LMS system, usually can have a rubric where you can just check off where the student is, or enter a number, or enter a grade. And that can help with efficient assessment of authentic assessments too.
The next question is about multiple choice questions. Does multiple answer MCQ helps if time per question is limited to, for example, 2 minutes? There was also some additional response to that question, or the conversation about time limits in general. One participant worried about time limits on questions given how much it will escalate student anxiety. And also the observation that the time per question does depend on the question, right? And all of those are true. And, you know, this is another balancing act, right? We've got students and faculty and staff all under a great deal of stress. And, you know, I think we've just got to weigh the risk and reward benefits of these different strategies, because no one size fits all approach is going to solve it.
Yeah, no, it's true. And also you can do multiple choice questions, exams that are at Bloom's higher level in the taxonomy too, right? So it's really about what type of question is it? Is it a memorization question? Students are going to be not only more tempted to look it up, but probably more able to look it up and quickly. If it's something that's at more of the application analysis level, then that will be more difficult for them to do.
I'm going to actually skip down to one question that sort of follows on to this, exactly in the way that the question and Tricia's response to it was heading. The respondent says, I suppose one issue with moving to more authentic assessments is that in first year courses, at least at this person's institution, we need to provide students with general information before they're able to play with it. And for instance, you need background before you can play with emergent ideas. This person provides a mix of multiple choice and short answer tests for the general type courses. It's clear that fewer students are capable of answering questions that require building upon the basic info. If I construct more or all questions in this manner, I feel I will leave many of the weaker students behind. Thus, is there a way or a process of testing the basic info in a more authentic way? I'll just make one observation, and then I think Tricia's probably got the richer insight here. But I think there's an importance. We're focusing here on summative assessment, but I think we need to think about the continuum from formative to summative and the way that maps to scaffolding of learning. And I think where possible, if we can lower the stakes on assessment, especially if we're talking about this more basic info, it may be that lower stakes formative knowledge checks, a kind of thumbs up, thumbs down. Did you get this basic building block? And if you didn't, then we need to sort of recursively go back. If you did, then just move along to the next thing toward the more higher ordered component. So sometimes, reframing how we think about what needs to be assessed in what way, sometimes a formative assessment on those sort of lower building block basic skills can take some of the anxiety that might induce the sort of psychosocial context in which students often make bad choices. And it can lower the instructional burden. It's more of a thumbs up, knowledge check rather than maybe a full rubric to assess that thing.
Yeah, No, that's a really, really good point, Doug. And I was thinking when you were talking about the anxiety question that was earlier in terms of timed questions, that can also help with doing those formative low stakes or no stakes and assessments throughout that scaffolding. And usually I have faculty say to me, well, students won't do it if there's no grade attached to it. And I'm not sure. Please mute your, thank you. So if you can, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What was I saying? Oh, that students won't do them if there's no grade. And I think that they will. You need to tell them why. I mean, you need to help them understand why they're doing it. And once they get to that first summative assessment where they didn't do the formative and they kind of bomb it, maybe they'll learn the hard way. Doug, I'm going to mute all, and then you'll have to unmute yourself again, maybe.
Okay. There we go.
Okay.
There's a question about academic misconduct case management, and we're going to punt on that because I think the webinar that James Orr is going to provide following these will be a better place to cover that. And we'll stick with more of the approaches on teaching and learning. How does limiting time and many other solutions proposed to prevent cheating work with students with official accommodations?
Great question. So of course we still need to provide accommodations just as we would in person. And so you might have to create quizzes for students who have time and a half. For example, you might have to have them in a different quiz than you have for the other student. So please work closely with your teaching center, any instructional designers you have, and your office for students with disabilities in making sure that you are attending to those needs. Those are important to keep up during this remote instruction environment.
A similar question along the lines of supporting students. Assuring quality of degrees works as a value for students who are doing well. Do you have any suggestions about what to say to students who are doing poorly, who feel they have to violate academic integrity in order to survive, and for instance, not fail the course or not flunk out of school? Tricia's going to have a much richer response to this as well, I'm sure. But my only observation here would be that as I'm thinking specifically about the sort of mass, fast move to remote teaching that we're making, we really, if you can't reach out to, if you have the technology.
Jesus, please, Trevino, please mute your mic. I will try and find him. Keep talking, Doug.
If you don't have the capacity to reach out and establish, as rich a connection as possible with your students as you're moving online, then at least look at those students who are at risk, the ones who aren't doing well to the point of the question, and try to find a way to reach out to them. I think especially in this environment, if you've already got a student who's doing poorly and is under the kind of stressors that can lead to bad choices, then that's going to be heightened by this transition. And especially when you're moving from a face-to-face to fully online environment, finding ways to leverage whatever technology you have available to you to establish as profound and meaningful interpersonal connection, especially with those students, is going to be one of the ways that you can help prevent them from feeling like their only option is to make bad choices. And so that's going to depend on the technologies that you have available to you. But that it's really important to establish those connections, because students who are feeling stressed and already at risk, that's going to be intensified, especially if they feel isolated from you or their peers in the move to online.
Absolutely. That's the best advice that I would give as well, is probably doing more than you have done in the past of monitoring students' progress and making a point to reach out and doing those video virtual conferences with students, as I mentioned earlier. And timely reminders of integrity at assessment time can help as well. Even those students who are desperate, most oftentimes they're not planning to cheat, right? It's not until they open up, they do their best and they open up that exam or that quiz or something, or start the assignment, and then they choose to cheat. And so at that moment, right, it's not pre-planned. So doing that timely integrity reminders can help people too. And that timely integrity reminders should come with, contact me if you're struggling. Contact me if you need an extension. We bantered about having the term integrity extension, right? Be more flexible in terms of those kinds of things. If students need an integrity extension, then give them one. You can't, I always say, I can't grade all the assessments or assignments at the same time anyways. So as long as it's still fair for everybody, give students free, you can have 2 extensions this term or whatever number you want to put on it. No excuses needed. Just tell me you're going to use your extension, and that's totally fine. So those are ways to help students as well in those situations.
Yeah. We've got a couple more questions and we're running to the top of the hour, so I think we've got good time. So one is about proctoring. Anything those of us using the proctoring software should know about the ways students are going to go around it?
Doug, I think that's more of a you question.
Proctoring, so no technology solution is a silver bullet. And when we think about trying to assure academic integrity in online environments, the focus really needs to be on the curriculum, instruction, and assessment design. And I think that you've heard that theme throughout. And so proctoring is a way to strengthen or harden the security around the assessment experience, but there aren't any tools that are fully cheat proof. And so what I think is more important than trying to play the cat and mouse game of fully trying to secure an arrangement that is simply too, it's too full of ways to get around the structures of cheating, is to reinforce that why are you doing this? Why is assessment security important? Why is the authenticity of the assessment and the students' performance on it matter? So the in context honor pledges that we've talked about work right before the moment of either starting the assessment, or if it's online, often right before you submit it. If you can introduce a moment that really forces reflection, that students have to really think and reflect personally that if this isn't their work, they are purposefully misleading and conducting some kind of academic fraud, that can help reinforce what the proctoring solution can't prevent.
Yeah.
And then finally, before we turn it back to Tricia to wrap us up, any resources about how to create these new types of assessments and exams? And we're going to provide that. We've been collecting, first of all, you all are a rich crowdsourced environment. We've been collecting all of the rich resources you've been sharing on the chat. We're also going to crowdsource our networks and begin to collect some of those resources. And I suspect, I don't want to speak for Amanda, but I suspect that will go into the document that we're creating that will be a kind of shared online crowdsourcing space. So thanks for all your great questions, and thanks for joining us. Back to Tricia.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And just to wrap up, remember the remote teaching, join that Google group. Another awesome listserv, which has been overwhelming a bit the last week, is Pod. It's all teachers, instructional designers, teaching centers, staff, people who care about teaching, and there have been some amazing resources shared there when it comes to not so much teaching for integrity, but on some of the teaching questions you've been asking about authentic assessments and some of those techniques. Because one thing I want to end with is teaching for integrity is also teaching for learning. So the good news is whatever method you put in place to enhance integrity or enhance learning, for example, are also going to enhance integrity. So keeping it to the quality of teaching as the first step, and I know that's a higher hanging fruit, and the prevention and protection as the second step, I think will serve you well. Thank you all for joining us. I'm sorry for some of the difficulties we had. I understand I didn't know this webinar was capped at 300. It allowed 600 and some people to register, but only allowed 300 people in. I apologize. We will offer more webinars and the recording as we mentioned. So stay tuned for more information. We'll put that out on the remote teaching at googlegroups.com once we have some dates, and we'll also put it out through the ICAI listserv. So if you're not a member of our listserv, you will want to join that as well. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye. Bye, Gonzalo. Camilla, go ahead and stay on. I'll stay on with you.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? I see you're at home.
Yes.
Crafting wall?
Well, that's my wife's room for quilting.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Hi, Camilla.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Adiós, Daniela.
I'm sticking around too, so we can just chat about a couple things.
Yeah. I'm trying to remove, there's some people hanging around, so I'm just trying to
Yep.
remove them.
Remove that Jesus person who was, I think, making the extraneous noise.
Yes.
Camilla's mouth is moving, but I cannot hear the words.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. You're still recording. I don't know if we
Oh,
want to stop
thank you.
that recording.
Hi,
Yeah.